everyone, to this new episode of our show. Today we have the pleasure of having with us Harry Moser, who founded the Reshoring Initiative to bring 5 million manufacturing jobs back in the US. And this was after serving as a president for high-end machine to supplier GF Aji Sharmi. Harry was inducted into the Industry Weekend Association for Manufacturing Excellence Halls of Fame. Congratulations for that. And was named by Fab Shop Magazine's Manufacturing Person of the Year in the past. He was an actor in President Obama's Insourcing Forum in 2012. And he won at the time the Economist debate on outsourcing and offshoring. And there is a long list of
achievements.
Prestigious experiences and success that I'm not gonna read today. But Harry is really a well-known person in the U.S., regularly quoted in the national business media, seen on TV. A graduate from MIT in engineering and an MBA graduate from the University of Chicago. So first of all, Harry, it's wonderful to have you today. And maybe we can start with you adding something to what I have read, just to say a little bit more about your journey and what you do today.
Paolo and Francesco, it's an honor to be here. It's a pleasure. Look forward to our discussion. So a little more background on me. I was born in Elizabeth, New Jersey, which is right across the river from New York City. And the biggest thing in town was Singer Sewing Machine, which in its day, 120 years ago, had the largest factory in the world, 5,000 employees, 3 million square feet. So today it would be a huge factory. For then it was incredibly big. And my grandfather was a foreman. My dad ran about a third of the factory. I worked there summers. And I drove past 20 years ago, and nothing is there anymore. Nothing, as far as I can tell, of the company is made in the United States. Everything was replaced by imports from low-wage countries. At first Japan, and then. And through my career, I sold CNC machine tools and foundry equipment. And industry after industry, company after company I wanted to sell to got wiped out before I had a chance to sell them anything, in many cases. Of course, we succeeded, but I experienced this decline in U.S. manufacturing from its incredible peak after World War II to the current condition. And that's been the driving factor for me in addressing the offshoring problem and the reshoring opportunity.
Nice. There is a clear personal drive into having an impact on this conversation. Good.
No, sure. And I think you already made a natural bridge to the core questions. Then we have here, such as, please, like your opinion, tell us about which were the biggest driver for globalization, and also your perspective now. How is globalization / how it's gonna be developing? What's the evolution? What about the regionalization? What happening to supply chains now? So it's a big question, I know, to you.
So you might say, huh? So
I know.
I'll parse it the way I think I understand it, and you correct me if I get it wrong. But I think the question is why did we get so much globalization?
Yes, sir.
What's the root cause that brought us to so much globalization, which is
In your
now
opinion, yes.
tending to be reversed? And in terms of sort of economic factors, generalized the intermodal shipping container. It used to be you pick things up with a crane, you put them in the hold, and you did this, and you dropped it, and things got lost and broken. And now everything goes in the container. You put 10,000 containers on a boat, and it goes across the ocean. And so that's dramatically reduced what I call friction. So if you think of it this way, globalization was enabled by the removal or reduction in friction, which allowed the underlying conditions to be revealed. Think of that as a sort of a global statement. So these shipping containers, NAFTA, basically eliminating duties on products within North America. So I'm speaking largely from a North American perspective. China entering the WTO.
So you are mainly referring to 1999 Seattle.
Yes.
So regulation mainly.
internet and CNC. So it used to be I wanted something made in somewhere or other. I had to put a sort of a letter on a boat, had to go there and tell them what I wanted, and they'd have to trust me on the money, and then it would somehow come back over here. And now internet, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. CNC used to be you'd send a paper print to somebody in some other country, and somebody would get it, and they'd have a bunch of handles like this on a mill or a lathe, and they're making something, and maybe it turns out to be what you want. Whereas now with CNC, computer numerical control, CAD, CAM, etc., absolutely defines what it is. They put it on the machine. It makes exactly what you want. You get exactly what you want. You know what you're going to get. So think of that again as friction being eliminated from the system so that the underlying conditions are more exposed. Company accounting and sourcing practices. So companies, when they consider the standard cost or cost of goods sold of a product, many of them still look primarily at the price. How much did I pay for it? And we recommend looking at the total cost of ownership, which has the duty and the freight and the carrying cost of inventory and the intellectual property risk and the risk of stocking out, all other kinds of things that should go into it. So by simplifying and looking just at the price, they enabled more of the offshoring. In the U.S., especially a short-term focus. Companies deciding that what counts is profitability this quarter.
Oh yeah.
And not so worried about 5 years from now, 10 years from now for the company and the country. And therefore that short-term focus tended to drive them to buy the cheapest thing and get by.
So more focused on from an investor standpoint, more than a country standpoint, you say, right?
From a company standpoint, from an investor standpoint, from a manufacturer standpoint, very short-term focus, and especially in the U.S., a short-term focus in terms of investment. Germans, for example, things are slow, they still buy a new CNC machine. Whereas Americans, when things are slow, they buy nothing and they hunker down and they barely survive, kind of thing. And then when things are good, maybe they start to buy. Whereas in other countries, they tend to be more consistent in their automation and their investment in technology. An important consideration in the U.S., consumer preference for the lowest priced product. U.S. consumers, I think, were the first in the world to just buy the cheapest thing they could get at a time when Germans, Italians, French still preferred something made in their own country. So we were the vanguard of that, losing the work to offshore. In terms of making things here, skilled workforce is an important part of the equation. That's true anywhere. But in the U.S., manufacturing careers turned out to be, over the last 20 or 30 years, less desirable due to a couple of things. First, everybody saw their uncle or their father losing the job at the mill, and there were no other jobs for them, and therefore why would I want to go into manufacturing? And second, we've had a wage compression versus services. Used to be you could pay 30% more in manufacturing than in Starbucks, or somewhere. But now there's a glass ceiling on top of the manufacturing wage, because if you get the manufacturing wage too high, you can't compete with the product coming in from China, India, Mexico somewhere. Whereas if Starbucks raises its wage, well, then McDonald's and Burger King will raise their wage, and they're only competing with each other. So you don't have this tradable good consideration that's involved in manufacturing that is not involved in most services, at least. So I think all those things played a role in accelerating the globalization.
Yeah. So a lot of factors I heard. Let me try to wrap up a little bit. We talked about a lean regulation, especially after Seattle 1999, all right? We talked about preference to low-cost product, whatever it is, especially for U.S. We talked about workforce, the change in terms of manufacturing, preferences. We talked about the labor cost in terms of COGS impact for these products. We talked about transportation costs, probably, risk-free scenarios like 30 years ago, fuel price, Brent price was lower. So, containers come and go was easier to do. We talked about literally unexplored risk about, a loss of knowledge, like patent and stuff. We talked about also the quality issues totally kind of ignored. And also an important point of view, like a short vision of the future, like mostly focused on like shareholders, investor, also the quarter, the end of the year, versus like the top 5 years vision, 10 years vision, like building like step by step. And it's a huge scenario. You helped us to like sum up in so many ways with this list of the factors. Since it's most US based, and your point of view is very US based and very important, what US should do in terms of rebalance these forces into this evolution of globalization leading to regionalization and US case reshoring / side question, how related supply chain gonna evolve? Which are key factors in your perspective?
Okay. First, let me answer the what should the country do. When you put all those other things together, it turns out that the U.S. manufacturing costs compared to, say, China, which has been the big 800-pound gorilla, U.S. manufacturing cost is roughly 50% higher than China's on average across a broad range of goods. We've got the statistics on it from people who use our software, and that's huge. When companies can are forced to pay that much more here than what they can buy it for there, it's really hard to decide to do it. And so you have to get that price differential, like cost differential, down substantially to the point where the company can look at it somebody can convince the CFO and the board to spend 10% more on something, whereas it's impossible to convince them to spend 40% or 50% more on something. And so from our viewpoint, to make that happen, we say the first thing that the U.S. government should do, no matter what, the first thing should be skilled workforce, because we clearly
education first,
education of everybody, because then you got good education for those who become engineers, those who become poets or professors, but also for those who become tool makers and welders and precision machinists and people like that. So a basic good education, but then once you've done that and the kids are getting towards the end of high school, instead of everybody going off to university and 40% of them dropping out, and 40% of those who graduate never having a job that requires a university degree, instead have like in Germany, where 60% of the kids go into apprenticeships. And therefore, you have really smart kids getting really well trained, and so you have a higher quantity, which means you can increase output, but also a higher quality, so you can improve quality, improve productivity, and be more competitive in the workplace. So for us, skilled workforce, absolutely number one. And then to attack directly the cost issue, we say first is, from our viewpoint, everybody can disagree with this, but from our viewpoint, the easiest solution is to take some of the premium out of the value of the dollar. So the dollar, almost everybody agrees, the dollar is overvalued by about 20%, 20 to 30%, based on a purchase price parity kind of analysis. And as a result, things cost more in the U.S. than they would otherwise. And it's a great place to be a bank, because it's a place for everybody to store their money, which drives up the value of the dollar. But it's not a good
from
place.
A consumer standpoint, it's different. Yeah,
good for bank, but not good for factory. And so, and there are methodologies like the market access charge to gradually get 20% or so out of the dollar. And to me, that's the simplest thing, because it applies to all things everywhere. It means the U.S. Standard of living is going to come down a little bit, but at least people will have good jobs. The U.S. will be safe industrially, defense, all that kind of thing. So,
on this point, sorry, Harry. Let me chime in here. I follow you a lot. What about the TCO approach, like total cost of ownership? Mm-hmm. Because we can discuss about like higher maybe price purchasing from low cost country, but if you put every factor like in a row, like transportation and tariff, especially nowadays, or additional cost, invisible cost, all the stuff maybe costing more, versus, the same item buying locally, costing more in terms of just the price, but with not all the other factors around.
Well, the total cost of ownership, thanks for mentioning it. It does does help calculate and quantify all the relevant costs and risks, maybe 29, 30 of them. But my experience, if you go into a company and say, I want you to spend 40% more on that product because you're going to save it in the future when risk comes down, when you don't stock out, and the guys can say, hey, by the time that happens, they'll have fired me because the earnings have been so bad. So you got to go from having the cost difference this much to having the cost difference, that 10%. 10% say, hey, yeah, I can do that. I'm willing to take that risk. And so again, skilled workforce, get the dollar down, and then tariffs is certainly a viable alternative. But we say if you're going to do tariffs, they should be on everything, from everywhere, forever. Because if you don't do it on everything, then, for example, Trump tariffs steel heavily. And I run into companies over here that say the product coming in from China, finished, completed, complex piece, is selling for less than my cost of the steel I have to buy to make the product, because they buy the steel for 20% or 30% or something less in China. So you have to do it on everything. So not just steel, but things made out of steel. If you can do that, then do it on everything. You have to do it on every country, because if you don't do that, then countries like China will ship their product through Vietnam or Mexico or somewhere else to get it here. And if you don't do it forever, then companies will not invest the tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars to build a factory here if they think you're going to have a tariff that's only going to last for 2 months or 6 months, or it's like Trump back and forth and who knows what, and therefore they're not going to invest. So you need to, if you can do it. So if you're going to do it under those conditions, then from our viewpoint, the right solution is a value-added tax, which taxes the product coming in, subsidizes the export, helps the U.S. dramatically on its balance of payments. And I spoke at the National Association of Business Economics about 3 months ago. I was on right after Jerome Powell. I describe him as my lead-in man. And I talked to one of the economists. I said, what do you think about tariffs? I hate tariffs. I said, what do you think about a VAT? I love VATs. VATs are wonderful. I said, why is that? Because they tax consumption, and we consume too much. And therefore you can lower the tax on investment, income, and work. And we need more investment. We need more work. So that's a good thing, whereas tariffs in general are a bad thing.
Interesting. And Harry, I would like to add another perspective to this conversation, which is the one of sustainability. Of course, a topic I'm very passionate about. And I guess the topic of sustainability and the topic of ESG, plays a role in the restructuring of global value chains. So what is your opinion on that?
ESG is very important. Actually, as a sort of a conservative Republican, I used to be sort of anti-ESG, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. And then I saw what a good argument it is for localization. And therefore, the Republicans, I think, are missing a great opportunity to push ESG as part of their package. And so we've done studies on 9 different products: steel, aluminum die casting, furniture, apparel, I can't remember what, and looked at the CO2 emissions associated with making it in any specific other countries and then shipping it here versus making it here. And especially for products that are fairly electricity intense, the CO2 emissions per unit of product are reduced 25 to 50%. And that's
easily.
A portion of that is the shipping, but the shipping is really very efficient. I mean, there's not that much fuel per ton kind of thing. Yeah? But most of the difference is that for an electricity intense product like a die casting or aluminum, the CO2 per kilowatt hour, for example, in China, is 2 or 3 times as high as here, because U.S. is about 15 or 20% coal in making electricity, in China is 60 or 60% or so.
And the energy mix that is completely different.
So when you put that together, both the electricity, the CO2 from the making the electricity to make the product, and then the shipping of it, you wind up with 25, 50%. And so it turns out that something like 75% of emissions are in scope 3, which is in the supply chain. And companies haven't been able to do much about scope 3. They're good on scope 1, good on scope 2, weak on scope 3. And I've proposed that the best sort of rating system for a company would be: are you buying much offshore? If so, in which countries? And if you're buying it there and selling it here, well, you get a bad mark. Whereas if you're making it here and selling it here, you get a good mark, because the CO2, you just know the CO2 is going to be dramatically lower, as opposed to trying to get numbers up from dirt floor factories all around the world, which they never can do. Anyway.
And today,
Well,
of
let me
course,
also say that there's
yeah,
been,
absolutely.
I've seen some surveys specifically in Europe of U.S. and European companies that say that the companies are leading to reshoring as one of the best solutions for their ESG
Problems.
problems.
Yeah.
So companies seem to be starting to understand that.
And I mean, today, of course, this phenomenon of regionalization of global value chains is something we are experiencing, and we see jobs moving back to the US. I guess this reflects a strategic change in the corporate community. But I guess from an operational perspective, when you are an American organization and you had your value chain organized in a certain way for 20 years, and now you want to basically rethink the model and I guess move back pieces of value creation to the US. What type of operational challenges you normally face based on your experience?
I think skilled workforce in general. We don't have enough simple, low-skilled people, especially with Trump wanting to deport all
Yeah.
the illegal immigrants, and so don't have enough of those. Many Americans would rather sit and do nothing than take a low-skilled, low-prestige kind of job, unfortunately. So workforce problems, especially skills. On the other hand, at least in terms of workforce, the U.S. is getting better. Like I compare us to Germany, and Germany used to be the gold standard with their apprentice program. They were at 10, and it's solid. All the kids wanted to become an apprentice. And now more of their kids want to go into liberal arts and university and do whatever. And in the U.S., gradually, slowly, but consistently, the number of apprentices per year is going up. I read almost every day about a community college spending $10 million on a machining training facility. Credentials, I deal with several of the credential organizations like MSSC and NIMS, and they're doing really well providing credentials for people short term as opposed to 3-year, 4-year apprenticeship. And so the surveys say that kids are starting to understand that something like an apprenticeship is a very valid alternative to a degree, that they can get similar economic outcomes throughout their life and not have the hundreds of thousands of dollars of initial investment. And they start working when they're 18 or 16 instead of when they're 23. And you put the numbers together and the return on investment is very attractive. And that's starting to come through to people. So I feel good about the direction of skilled workforce. The automation is obviously essential. So if you're going to be a high wage country, you have to have your productivity be as high as is possible. And that means AI, it means robots, it means CNC. And the U.S. has done a poor job of it. If you compare us to China, we invest maybe a third or a fourth as much per year in robots and CNC as they do. And that's even though their wages are a third as much as ours. So you'd think we'd be putting a lot more in than they do. So they've taken that longer term perspective. And as a result, if you compare labor productivity, China's is reported to be going up at about 6% per year. And that was easy when they were starting from nothing, but now they're comparable to U.S. productivity and still going up at 6% per year. And the U.S. manufacturing labor productivity is unchanged since 2010.
Yeah. There's
Also, if I can jump here, Francesco, just for a second, I guess
Sure.
something that potentially is a game changer concerning the future of productivity globally is the use of robots, because a robot costs the same most likely in a country or the other one, and therefore the traditional difference you have in cost of human labor, I guess, is leveled by the introduction of robotics. What do you think about it, Harry?
Oh, I agree. Robotics is an obvious AI, robotics, AI-enabled robotics, the whole thing. And they're getting better. You see robots doing amazing things these days. And to some extent, it will certainly be doing the jobs that you can't get the an intelligent human to want to do: safe, dirty, hot, whatever kind of.
Sure.
Yeah. But also just, I think of it as, it's not just manufacturing that says it has a shortage of people, but almost every industry now, truck drivers, teachers, doctors, almost everybody except the government says they can't find enough employees. And so somehow we've got to come up with more people working than we have now. So to me, part of the challenge is to cut back employment in areas where the marginal return to the final worker is very small and put them into places where the marginal return is high. So for example, in the United States, I think of the Postal Service. So we deliver mail 6 times a week, and maybe one time I find something that's of any use and any interest to me. So if they delivered twice a week, it would be fine. You could take out, I think, hundreds of thousands of people from the Postal Service and train them in factories to do something that would be much more productive than driving around dropping off advertisements that nobody wants to read. So, for example, and I've got a list of maybe 10 other industries that I would help become more efficient.
Oh, that's interesting. Of course, robotics into, how can I say, capital intensive like environment. Yes, totally agree. When it comes to labor intensive environments, there's also, I would say back to 70s, back to 80s, like lean manufacturing. That framework and paradigm to like look for waste and cut waste to like get the productivity higher and higher year over year. That's it. That's something we know, and actually born in US before exported into Japan. Long story.
Yeah.
Let's go to next question. I would say more about
Let me mention though. One of my neighbors up in Maine is Jim Womack. Lean Enterprise Institute.
Yeah.
And he talks about lean shoring. So he says
of course.
So when you bring it back, you cannot put it in the old factory with the old machines and the old flow and the old workforce without any more training and engagement. Instead, you need to rethink the whole thing and bring it back in a lean, more productive fashion.
That's so connected. So yes, that's why I mentioned that. Absolutely, and thanks for sharing. Next question I would say, which are the stakeholders, your perspective, impacting evolution of the global value chain, and where are the pressures, if any, coming from?
Coming from to reverse globalization or to continue globalization?
I would say both. Up to you how to answer.
Okay. So in terms of continuing it, the supply chain profession. Now, the supply chain, the procurement people at companies almost always are rewarded for something like a purchase price variance, for buying this package of goods for 2% less than what they paid for them last year. And if they do that, then they're a winner. And I've had salesmen, people who make like machine parts and stuff, and they'll say, I'm in talking to X company and I want to make parts for them. And they said, okay, you'd have to match the China price. And they say, no. Our guy says, I hear you're having quality issues and warranty issues and delivery issues and too much inventory some of the time. And I can eliminate all that for you. And the purchaser says, no, sorry, all those issues are in someone else's budget. They're not in my budget. And so the companies tend to be very siloed, and the purchasing department, the procurement looks only at the price too often, not exclusively, but generally too often looks only at the price and does not consider the overall needs of the companies. So to me, procurement is a significant part of the offshoring or globalization trend. There's been at the board level, say, there's been a belief that core competence no longer includes manufacturing, that it's R&D, it's marketing, and it's finance. And then get rid of all those assets, so we reduce our asset base, have everything made for us outsourced in China or somewhere, so the unit cost comes down, so the margin goes up and the assets go down, the return on assets get better, and my stock goes up, kind of thing, right? And we believe they're starting to see that again, that manufacturing should be a core competence. For example, there's work at Harvard Business School, Pisano and Shi, showing that the industrial commons only works if you both manufacture and you do R&D. And when you do that, it's easier to optimize both the product design so that it can be manufactured and the manufacturability. And if you separate those two, especially with 5,000 miles, then the system typically doesn't work so well. Now, the government is obviously an important player in this. In the U.S., at least, forever it has believed in laissez-faire, free market, blah, blah, blah. And that made sense when the value of the dollar was based on the balance of payments. If you had a big deficit, your currency went down, if you have a big surplus, your currency went up, and things tend to come into balance. Doesn't happen anymore for the U.S. because we're the reserve currency. So the government has been a negative factor in this. Obviously, under Trump, it's starting in its own chaotic way to do something about it.
Okay, I would say connected to the last half an hour we discussed. Can you share some examples about maybe value chain restructuring, like you heard from clients, you guided, or just have you seen in the recent year, especially after COVID?
Okay. So I have a couple of favorites that I'm going to tell you about. One is Sumitomo Drive Technologies, which is a brand of Sumitomo Machinery Corporation of America, and they received the 2024 National Metalworking Reshoring Award, which we put on along with 4 or 5 other trade associations. And they had been making their product, or big portions of their product, China, other places, and they reshored to Virginia and nearshored to Mexico. They have factories in both locations, and bought millions of dollars worth of new CNC machine tools, bought castings from Waupaca Foundry in Wisconsin and from a Mexican foundry. So they reshored the castings, not just the machining, increased their sales by millions of dollars because their deliveries got better because they were making timely now for the customer. And it was just a great success story. That's one. A second one that I've been involved in is a smaller company called Nedco, New England Die Company. And they make very precise tools. You'd have to see them to understand them, but they make these things. It used to be they'd EDM and then they'd manually grind, and they had really highly skilled people doing it, but very manually intense. So they bought a CNC Studer grinder, and the 2 highly skilled guys retired, and so the owner was able to produce these products with the CNC grinder with 70% reduction in labor cost because the machine was able to do so much of the work unattended. And all of a sudden, they were really competitive on that. And because the machine was CNC, it could run nights unattended. So all of a sudden, they could do high volume work too. So at this point, 70% of the work in the factory has been reshored. It's work that they had lost offshore, and now they've brought it back. So it's been quite a success story. At sort of the other end of the spectrum, I've got a good friend at a company called Unionware, which is a unionized Newark, New Jersey shop, makes apparel. The toughest thing in the world in the U.S. to reshore is apparel, 97% imported. And it specifically makes caps and bags. The owner, Mitch Kahn, has done a great job of looking at an object, a hat or a bag, and he can find ways to cut labor but add a little bit of cost on material to become more competitive. Great job of promoting what he does, and they've done extremely well. Done very, very well with that. So those are my 3 favorite cases.
These are, I guess,
Thanks for sharing.
Good stories. And now moving to maybe stories where you really have been a driver and an actor. Are there particular initiatives that you would like to share with our audiences? Something that you are particularly proud of?
One that I help with is called Morey Corp, Morey Corp in Woodridge, New Jersey. They're approximately $100 million a year EMS companies. They populate circuit boards, electronics, okay? And 2 stories. One I heard about, the other one I help with. The first one, once these circuit boards are completed, they go into an aluminum die-cast housing, because then they go onto a Caterpillar tractor or something. You've got to keep the water off the electronics, okay? And I think they must have had a leak, must have had some kind of problem, because their customer said, you will bring the housing production back from offshore and get it here. And they did that, and they found a local aluminum die caster, and they checked, they audited what had happened, and their inventory of the product, of the housing, was reduced by 94%. Why? Because they were getting like once a week deliveries just in time, as opposed to once a quarter, a big container coming over full of stuff. They didn't have to keep extra units, because if they had a surge, they knew how they can get them quickly. So inventory down by 94%. Analyses of inventory average inventory level suggests that a 60 or 70% reduction should just be the just easy pickings for when you reshore. And for companies, if you can reduce inventory by 60 or 70%, that'll pay for a lot of extra price on the product that you have to buy.
Yeah.
And then about 5 years ago, they came to me and they said, Harry, we're about to lose a big order. Can you help us? I said, what's the problem? They said, well, big customer, China competitor offered a lower price. We think we're going to lose it. Can you help me? So we did the TCO calculation, total cost of ownership calculation.
Mm-hmm.
And I did it with Tony, the VP sales, to show the customer that even though Maury's price was higher, the total cost to the customer was lower when you considered all the relevant factors. And I got a letter back from Tony saying that doing that was the key to winning a $60 million order.
Wow.
Now what did I learn from that? I should have asked for a commission.
Yeah.
Good point.
So, yeah. So you partially answered to the next question about what's your initiative is coming up with, what you do in the next years. Of course, consulting, as you said, promoting TCO concept. What else?
So what are we going to do specifically is we're revising the TCO estimator. We got to get that out because we're including ESG, the Trump tariffs. We're including geopolitical risk, which is now rated as the biggest driver of reshoring. So specifically the risk of China-Taiwan war, which could knock out deliveries from that region for, who knows, 6 months, a year, a long period of time. We have a great database. We have the only database of reshoring and FDI cases. So we sell that to big financial firms that want to look at it to try and find opportunities for higher investment returns, to see where the opportunities are going to be. So we'd like to sell more of that because that's an easy way to make money is selling the data. And obviously we'd like our objective is to balance the goods trade deficit, which means U.S. manufacturing has to go up by about 40%.
Yeah, amazing. Last question. What's coming up next 5-7 years? Where should we focus our attention on?
Well, one of the things I wanted to get in, and I'm going to slide it in here, is that we see a gradual change in the supply chain management optimization, in that in the past, companies worried about what's the cost of that screw? How can I get 2% out of the cost of buying that screw? And now increasingly they're saying to themselves, how can I make sure I have the screw so that when I try to assemble my end product, I can finish the product and ship it and get my revenue, get my margin, keep my customer, et cetera, et cetera. So they've gone from worried about pennies on cost to protecting tens of thousands of dollars of price and margin. And that change in philosophy, all the disruptions, all the LA dock strikes, COVID.
Yeah.
And the risk hanging out there of something like China, Taiwan, is driving companies to protect the important things and worry a little less about some of those details. So we think that's important.
Risk mitigation and resiliency. Okay.
So again, your question again that I didn't.
Other factors? Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
But tell me again. Remind me of your question.
And what's your vision for the future, like 5-7 years?
Future. I can't remember now everything I've told you, but our vision is for reshoring. We'd like to see. We think that a base case is about 200,000 manufacturing jobs per year being reshored in FDI, which is up from 20 years ago, 10,000. So a dramatic increase. But it's not enough, and it won't get us to our goal. And so to get to the goal, we need that manufacturing cost differential to be reduced, to have, do some combination of better workforce, more workforce, dollar down, value-added tax, something like that, corporate tax rates, immediate expensing of capital investment, some of those some combination of those things, but especially the skilled workforce. Because if you don't have enough skilled workforce, you can't increase manufacturing. It's just a black and white.
Of course.
Adjusted for automation and all those other things.
Of course, Harry. Harry, it's been an amazing pleasure, honor to have you here. You are so into the U.S. manufacturing scene, and you shared with us a lot, walking across the last maybe 40 years about what happened in the U.S. and enhancing us to have a vision for like what's going to happen maybe in the future for US. Thanks for being here.
Thank you very much.
Thanks
It's
for
brilliant.
leading this episode.
Now,
And
let
Paolo,
me-
any other comment
if you
before we
have, if you have
close?
2 minutes left, let me add
Please,
course, yes.
go ahead.
resources that we provide. First, just by having the data, by being able to show the trend in number of jobs per year coming back, we believe we've improved the feasibility, the credibility of the trend, and therefore company B sees that company A did it, and therefore they say we ought to at least look at it. And when they look at
user
it,
cases.
we offer them the TCO estimator so they can do the calculation and see that a little bit higher price makes sense for them in the long run. We also offer something called the import substitution program, under which a company can put up a product that they're really good at making, whatever, a shaft, a pump. And we can tell them who the biggest importers are of those products and how much that tonnage that company's bringing in, what they're paying for it,
Sure.
whom they're getting it from. And then our client can go to that importer and say, look, I see you're bringing in 50 tons a year of this. We've got this great new machine for doing it. We've done the TCO calculation. We think you're going to be 5 points better off. Why don't you give us a chance to bid on that work? So we're trying to get in there and actually make that happen. And then we did come out about 9 months ago with a geopolitical risk map that shows the probability of decoupling, U.S. decoupling with each other country. And by considering that, the company can say, well, if I didn't get all those components from China, how long would it take me to replace them? Months, years? How much revenue would I lose in that time period? How much margin would I lose times the probability, expected value of loss? Therefore, how much more should I be willing to pay now as insurance to have those products so that if that happens, I will not have that loss?
Interesting
Yeah.
modeling. Excellent. Brilliant. What a way to end.
Yeah, thank you, Harry. And Paolo, any other final comments before we
I
wrap up
think
and
it was
close?
really interesting, Harry. I thank you for sharing very practical stories that I'm sure are going to resonate with our audience. Truly, my congratulations for the good work you are doing in the US. It's truly impressive.
I'm honored to be included in your study.
Thank you.
Sure. Thanks, Harry.
Bye,
Bye,
Harry.
guys.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed this discussion, we invite you to like and share this episode on your social media. Enjoy the rest of your day.